Hello, welcome to Autistic Chess Openings. We're covering the Scotch Gambit as white, line number 14. All right, let's summarize today's line. Scotch Gambit on the board, and they go bishop c5, the second most popular response. And we've covered this 3 times before. This is our 4th time. We go knight g5 as before, attacking the f7 pawn. This time they defended optimally, knight h6, we take, they take, we take, they take, and we check them on h5. We covered this before, except that we covered them playing g6 at this point, which happens 68% of the time. Today we're going to be covering if they step back to g8 or f8. They will be the same thing, so we can add these two numbers together, 17% and 13% into 30%, taking our 68% coverage all the way up to 98% coverage of this position, which is really nice. The reason we can combine them is because if they go to f8, we're going to take the bishop, take their bishop and check them. And if they go to g8, we're going to check them at d5, and they only have one legal move, which is to go to f8, and then we take the bishop with check, and it ends up being the exact same position. So they end up being the same. All right, so they step back to f8, and we take check. That's all we need to cover, because the g8 is the same thing. So they go d6 at this point. 53% of the time, they push that pawn in this position, just like before when they had pushed g6, and we took their bishop. They went d6 most commonly. So they go d6, but this time we're going to play things differently. Their king's not on f7 this time. Their g-pawn is on g7, not g6. And so going to c4 and checking them is a different plan. They don't have the holes on the dark squares from having pushed that g-pawn, and those tiny details change everything about what's optimal here. So when they've stepped back with their king, instead of pushing the g-pawn, we're going to go to h5 when they challenge our queen in the middle. They go d6, we go back to h5, and that's how we're going to play it. So they go queen f6, 45% of the time from here, so almost half the time they're going there. We're going to castle and line our rook up with their king and queen. All right, so then they see that they haven't developed their bishop, so they develop their bishop to e6, which is actually a top engine move. They go to e6, and now we challenge their pawn with c3. The most common response is to take that pawn, which is a blunder. It helps our score dramatically when they take there, and then we take back. So we'll cover that line because it's the most common response. This area of chess is not mapped very well, and so a lot of people don't know how to play it right. Their position is very difficult to play because they haven't castled. They have to castle manually, and we've castled naturally, and we have a lot of pressure over there. That's why we kept our queen on h5. There's a lot of room for error here. Very difficult to play, and sure enough, the most common response, bishop f7, is another blunder. It helps our score dramatically. We now move our queen because they're attacking it, and we can choose the spot that we get to put it, and there's 2 good spots, b5 and e2, and we're going to be going to e2, and that's going to be the end of our line. And there's 9 games that reach this point, and there are moves that they are likely to play from there, and it's kind of spread out, but rook e8 is happening 3 out of 9, and I think that's indicative of it being a common move in the future, and I'll talk about how to respond to their different moves here at the end. All right, let's get into the details. All right, so we put Scotch Gambit on the board. They did bishop c5. We do this combination to this point where we check them on h5. Let's catch my chess mapper up to that point. For those of you who don't, this is your first time, this is my chess mapper. It stores positions ahead of time, pre-calculated to a depth of 200 million nodes, which is pretty good coverage. And it makes it so that we can explore chess instead of just get Stockfish's opinion about a specific position. All right, so here we are, and g6. We can see that it has a score of equality. If they play g6, they're doing well, and they are defending optimally, and they have an equal game with us. If they don't, if they go king g8 or king f8, we end up with a decent lead. This lead is big enough. I don't think people would choose this. I think people who step back with their king don't know the opening. I think that's the majority of people. And as I look at the statistics of how many of those people mess up after that point, it confirms that. So we can assume at this point, if they step back with their king, that they don't know their opening, which is fantastic for us to know. That hand reveal, they're revealing their hand, and it helps us on the very next move. As soon as they step back to f8, we take check, and they challenge our queen, saying, you need to put your queen somewhere else. and we got to figure out where. And the choice of where we put our queen is something we're going to figure out ahead of time, because this would be very difficult to do accurately on the fly. And you'll see that. You'll see a lot of white players putting in a number of different spots, and it's very important choosing the right spot at this point. This is our strongest piece, and it's loose, and their king isn't castled. So we need to do this very delicately. So they go d6. Here's our options. Here's all those queen moves, okay? And we can see their scores. And I've been down queen b5, which is the top engine one here, and I've been down queen h5, which is second, and I've been down queen d5 and queen a3, and look down all of those, and I like queen h5 best. Why is it worse than queen b5, and why are we choosing it over queen b5? Here's why. They have a move they might find where that might reduce how much of a lead we have. So if we go queen h5, they might find queen e8. So if we go queen h5, they might find queen e8 right there. And if they do, then they gain some of their points back. We just got 30 to 40 points from them. We were at equality. They do queen e8 here, and now our lead is only slight and not quite as big, and we'll have to play chess from there. And that's what we risk. But how often does that happen? So how big is the risk? Queen e8 happens 3% of the time. 3% of the time, they ignore all the other things that need to be developed, all the natural common moves, and they do queen e8 here. And if they do, we'll still have a slight lead. We didn't lose everything. We just our 40 ended up more like 10, okay? Or actually that 40 is more like 30. But what do we gain? So we're risking a 3% chance of something happening where we lose 20 points maybe. All right, but what do we gain? All right, so if we look at the queen b5 line, instead, we could have gone queen b5. And we look at the common responses here. Here's their scores over here. And we can see 28, 44, 54, 106. And then we go look at the queen h5 line, and now look at the four common moves: 42, 57, 61, 166. We get a significant boost to all four common moves with the queen h5 line than we do with the queen b5 line. In other words, it's trickier. And so the trickiness score is higher. And is that worth a 3% risk? That's a judgment call, and I made the judgment call to say yes, it is. We're gonna go queen h5, take that risk, because even these numbers here, 42, 57, 61, they skyrocket up because, you know, if they're playing these inaccuracies, they're going to end up playing others down the road, and their position is very tricky to play like an engine. They got to do really weird moves to get into a comfortable position. They do not come naturally. They're very hard to find, and they're highly likely to mess it up. So we're going to go queen h5 as the most practical move against a human, not the optimal move against an engine. So we go queen h5. All right, queen f6. Let's put that on the board over here so we can see its score. All right, castling, that's our top engine response, and it's a clear winner. It's not questionable, so we castle. All right, here we are at this point. Now, their most common move, bishop e6, very natural, get their bishop out. Bishop d7 was actually neck and neck with it, slightly higher at this snapshot in time. They go bishop e6. All right. C3, that is not the most common response by a long shot, okay? These other moves are, and they're not nearly as good, and we can give our points right back to them if we try them out. No, C3 is the way to go here. We do C3. That's our dominant move. There's no question about that one. So we hit with C3, and now all four of their common responses are mistakes. They need to do these weird, unnatural moves like king g8, h6, queen g6, queen e5, rook c8, a5, a6, bishop c4, rook b8. Out of 125 games, almost hardly any of those got played. So these are very unnatural moves. That's why I like this line. Our 75-point lead is going to balloon up into the hundreds, or be very likely to. So d takes c3 is the most common. They take there, and that's their second best common move, and it gives us even more points, 20-something points. So we can see the 20-point initial advantage of playing the Ruy Lopez or the Italian game over the Scotch Gambit. We're seeing that points are cheap. All right, in the middle game, toward the end game, points are cheap. Optimal play is what matters, and this line is so tricky because we busted up their king side. It's very, very hard to play, and it's why I preferred over 20 measly points early on. All right. They take, our dominant move is definitely to take back with our knight. So we take back, And now we're down to 41 games. And here, let's make sure both of these are in the same spot here. Yep, we just took back. All right. So from here, bishop f7. This is another insight into what looks intuitive for a lot of amateur players. They see something that can be attacked, they attack it. Higher rated players tend to see that attack and say, okay, so that attack exists, let's hold it as a threat, unless it's better to cash that threat in now. And then they calculate to find out which of those is the case. In this case, it's better not to execute that right now. And also, when they do, they're allowing us a free wild card of where to put our queen. And did they really gain much out of it? Is that really part of the plan to help them get manually castled and safe, that bishop f7, optimally, long term? It doesn't work. The engine looks at all the variations that comes from here and says that's not a good way to go about trying to get to safety. So their 129 goes up to 175 for us. We're really winning here, really developing our position to be really imbalanced. Now at this point, our two dominant moves were neck and neck, queen b5 and queen e2. And this is another judgment call case. I could go straight queen b5, and then they have one good move and they found it every single time, rook b8. And then I go bishop e3, and this is the ending position. That's one option. But we'll get to that same ending position if we go to queen e2. So if we go queen e2, and then they do rook e8, which is their top common response, not their top response. They have all these weird moves that are hard to find. But the one that's natural and easy to find is rook e8, and we end up transposing. Then we go queen b5, then they go rook b8, then we do bishop e3, and here's our ending point. So we can see that this queen e2 will just transpose into, if we just go straight queen b5 and then they put the rook at b8, it'll just transpose into that. So why are we doing it? Because we're creating branching on purpose. Why would we create extra branches to learn on purpose? Because these branches are nice. We want them to do these moves. We don't want to learn branches where we gain 5, 10 points by learning a whole new branch, but we'll take 50. We'll take 100. Heck yeah. So take a look at this. We go queen e2. Look at the error rate here. There's only 9 games. And look at how many of them did awful, awful moves. This one here, g6, you know, that was played by a couple 2000s, 2076 and 2117. That's how, even at higher levels, these are hard to play. Now, some of these others are lower rated, 1900s, 1600s, 1900s. But still, we're giving them more rope to hang themselves with. We want to go to e2, and we will respond with rook e8 with queen b5. So let's take a look at the other responses here that they could do. This is our final position here, and 94. 94 happened twice out of those 9. So they go knight d4, we just respond queen d3, and we got an even better position here than we did by going queen b5 instead of queen e2. So that was worth it. All right, that's one of the least damaging ways they could continue. Bishop g6 is a lot more damaging. Look at that score, 279. So they go bishop g6. We again go knight d5. Our knight d5 move is strong. And here's our final scores here on the side for all their different moves. All right, so that's bishop g6. We already know rook e8. We're going to go queen b5, and then they have to bring the rook back, and then we go bishop e3. We've already seen that one. So we've now covered this one, and this one. That's 3. And now we're down to the last 2 before we end this video. So king e7. That one is disastrous, but let's cover it because it looks like a good idea if you can execute it. Get your king out of the way. Bring your rook behind it. Put your king back. They're trying to get the king out without moving their pawns in front of their king and making their position vulnerable, because it's really hard to figure out which pawn to push and how to maneuver the king and in a way that doesn't leave openings. That's so hard to figure out. They bring their king out trying to get their rook out, and that's a blunder, a really bad one. So if they go there, if they bring king to e7, you go knight d5 check, okay, which forks the king and queen. They're forced to take it. You take back, check. All right, this one's got some branching here. Let's just explore this a little bit. So bishop takes, e takes, check. All right, here's the branching here. Their knight's under attack, and we're checking them. We're now going to gain material unless they move the knight and block the check, or they move the queen and block the check, threatening our queen, which is unprotected at the moment. And then if we trade queens, their knight gets out of trouble, so it doesn't die. So we need to cover those. So if they bring the knight out, it's very easy, f4, and now you've won the piece. So they go down a lot more material there. The queen one. This one's very simple. You could go queen d1 if you want to choose simple. You go queen d1, and now you're threatening to pin their queen to their king with rook to e1, and you're threatening to kill their knight. And they cannot stop both those threats at once, and you end up gaining material there. There's a better way to respond that's more involved, though, if you want to learn that. So they block with the queen, you check with the bishop. Now this one gets a little tricky, so there's a fair amount of branching here. You check with the bishop. You can see that that's a little bit more dominant, and it allows more room for error. But there's a lot more responses they could do, so you have to learn more branching. Let's cover them in easiest to hardest. Queen d7 is awful. You check them on the diagonal. All right. So let's see here. Back up a minute. When we check them with the bishop, if they go to anywhere on the F file, so F7 or F8, then we're just going to move to F3 check and win their knight. So that covers the F file that they could move their king to. What else is left when we check them with that bishop? There's D7 and there's E8. So let's do, in both those cases, we're going to check them on the diagonal with our queen. So let's cover the first one. King D7, we check them on the diagonal. They're forced back to E8. We pin their queen to their king, and their knight's under attack, and that's game. That's going to give us a huge lead. All right. So that's if they go king d7. And our lead, if they do that, king d7, look at that lead. Queen g4 check, 989 points ahead. I mean, it's awful. All right. Now, what if after we check them, they step straight back? All right. We check them on the diagonal again with the queen. Now, don't worry about this g6 push. It looks a little tricky, but it's not a problem. So we check them on the diagonal. If they step king e8, we go queen h5 check, and look at how much more dominant that is over everything else. You know, we could there's some other options we could do, but queen h5 check is going to be a more dominant way to go. So if they move the king, we can take the knight. We can force it. Let's see here. King f8. We take the knight. Yeah. And then we're also threatening all kinds of nastiness with our king over there trapped in the back rank. So we check on the diagonal. G6 is the move that we need to confirm works, and it does. Queen h6. Queen h6 gives us a very dominant position. Nothing else does. So we have to respond queen h6. And now what we're threatening is to pin the queen to the king, and we're threatening the knight. And with both threats on the board, there's no way for them to answer both threats other than to go queen takes d5. Okay, take the pawn is no longer threatening their knight, and they're no longer in danger of having their queen pinned to their king. But now we go queen g7, attacking that rook. And if you take a look, that cut off the last square their king can move to. We're blocking everything in front of the king. Our bishop is covering d8. Our queen is covering f8. The king cannot move, and we're attacking the rook. That means that when we check the king with a rook, they can't move. So if they try and move that rook anywhere, like let's say they move it there disastrously, we check them with the rook. And now they can't block with the knight, or we checkmate them on e7. They're forced to put their queen in the way to block, and that queen's no longer protecting that rook, and we just trade off taking their queen, and then we take the rook, and then we take the other rook, and it's a nightmare. So that's the more fancy way to do it, the more powerful way to do it, but it does require a little bit more learning. So, but yeah, we can see that that king to e7 plan to try and move the rook out and then put the king back is going to fail dramatically to knight d5 check. All right, that was king e7. And then g6 is the last one that they might do in this final position that we find ourselves in. And if they try doing that, we hit them with bishop h6 check. And then if they go to the e file with king e8 or king e7, we drop that knight in, threatening the queen, threatening to fork. Or if they went to e7, it directly does the check. And we have a very similar position to all the stuff we just reviewed. They can take, we take, it's check, their knight's under attack, and it ends up disastrous for them. And if they go to g8, you hit them with f4, and you end up with a dominant position here. And that's how you handle each of the moves. That's how you handle the g6 and all the others. And that's it. Until next time, thank you.